As we talked about 2 weeks ago when we started, part of the reason I'm doing Judges is because this is a book that oftentimes we only engage as kids. And we never come back and look at it through an adult lens to figure out what in the world's going on in this book. Because quite frankly, there's a lot of ugly stuff happening in this book. And the way we tend to deal with it with kids is we tend to teach it as superhero stories. And that may not always be the case. And so today we're going to look at Judges, beginning of Judges through about chapter 2, verse 10, and what I like to call a hot mess of an introduction because there's some really weird stuff happening here. But there's also some things going on that I think maybe we miss that sets up what's going to happen in the rest of the book. A couple of introductory thoughts. So last time I made a statement that as I got to thinking about it, I thought, that's not right. And I went back and double-checked, and sure enough, I realized, I'm wrong. So we talked about a judge. The word for judge or the word to judge in Hebrew is shaphat. And that word isn't really a judge like we think of a judge, but it is someone, it has the sense of someone who restores shalom to a community, that restores things back to the way they're supposed to be. And a tribal chieftain is probably a better description of the word, but someone that keeps things working and functioning the way they're supposed to. And so one of the things you'll see at the end of almost every judge's story, it'll say, and the land had rest. And I said, I think last time, that the land has shalom. Technically, it's not shalom. The land had, the Hebrew verb is shakat, which means it's an odd. I don't say it's an odd word. It's not the word that we often think of when we think of rest in Hebrew. It's a word that means tranquility. It's a word tied to shalom. It's the result of shalom. So technically, the land does not have shalom at the end of the period. It has tranquility, which is often associated with shalom. So the concept stands, but I got my wording a little wrong there. Another thing to think about is that the book of Judges is not organized chronologically. Okay? It just isn't. There's also some parts of it, and one of them we'll look at today. It's almost like they were copied word for word from the book of Joshua. Okay? Also, when we look at how we break things up in the book of Judges, much like other books, the chapters that we have are something that were put in about, 1200 AD? Something like that. The chapter breaks are not part of the original text. The verse breaks are not part of the original text. And so where an interpreter decides to place those markers can influence how we interpret the text. And this is one of them in this passage we're going to be looking at today. And also, another thing that's kind of fun in the book of Judges is we have some pretty significant variations between the Hebrew Bible text, what we call the Masoretic text, and the Greek text, the Septuagint. And we actually have, there's two versions of the Greek Septuagint. We often refer to them as A and B. A is called Alexandrinus, it's from Alexandria. B is Vaticanus, like Vatican. And interestingly, in the book of Judges, the two Greek versions differ from each other in certain places. And then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which sometimes has some texts that are even different from all three of the others. Okay? So we have some places where we have some variation amongst how people interpret these stories in these different texts. And if you ask me which one is right, they're all right. Okay? We have no way of telling which is original. Okay? And also, one of the things we see in Judges is that there is an implicit, what we call the implicit narrator, right? The whole book is told from like a third-person narrator, but that narrator has different voices at different places in Judges. And so we'll see some of these today. We'll see some of them later on. But one of those voices is a voice that seems to tell the story as if it's sort of an epic, or even like a bard, right? Like an epic tale. And these tend to be like hero stories. Things like Samson, or Jephthah, or the Song of Deborah, which we'll look at in a few weeks. A lot of people think the Song of Deborah may be one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible. And then we also see that these stories tend to be similar to other ancient hero stories. So for example, Samson and Hercules share some sort of common things. The story of Jephthah and his daughter is very, very similar to the story of Iphigenia in Greek mythology. Then we have what we call the theologian's voice, which is probably the voice we're all most familiar with. And the name we give to the theologian in academia is the Deuteronomist, because he tends to have a view that is first established in Deuteronomy and carries through into Joshua, into Judges, and then into Samuel and Kings. And it has a strong emphasis on Yahweh's covenant with Israel. And we see this in Judges 2, and we see it in most of the stories between chapters 3 and 13. And then finally there's this what this particular scholar, Susan Nidich, calls the humanist voice, which often talks about tales as if they happened in olden times. Okay? And it tends to be fairly non-critical. It just lets the facts speak for themselves. Okay? And Judges 1 is mostly letting the facts speak for themselves. And then when we finally get to the horror that is Judges 17 through 21, particularly 19 through 21, it kind of lets the facts speak for themselves there. In the later period, what you get is you get a phrase that says, in those days, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Okay? Looking back and not necessarily making commentary on what they did, other than to say, this is why they did what they did. You know, this is how they were doing what they were doing. And some of the challenge is going to be is that these voices often overlap in different stories. Okay? And we will see some of that as we go through the text. So, now let's talk about Joshua and Judges together for a little bit. This is how the book of Joshua begins. It says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, my servant Moses is now dead. Now proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the Israelites. That's the beginning of Joshua. Here's the first line of Judges. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? So here's my question. What do you see that's similar? What do you see that's challenging? And what questions does this raise? Tim?
First question that comes to my mind is if Joshua led them into the land and they conquered everything, then why are they still going out to fight?
Yeah, that's the big question. If Joshua says, great, we went up and we conquered all this stuff and we took it, and then you get to the book of Judges, and what's happened to Joshua? He's dead. And what are the Israelites now doing? Trying to figure out who's going to conquer. Who's going to go up first? Okay? Good. Do you see any similarities between these texts? Okay. They both deal with the question of taking the land, taking it. Yep. Okay.
One is being told to, the other one is asking.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, one is being told, here's what you do. The second is asking, what should we do? How should we do it? Okay, good. One that's maybe kind of too obvious is the very first phrase after the death of Moses, okay, and the phrase after the death of Joshua. Identical phrasing, which seems to establish that there's a connection between Moses and Joshua, right? It's the way that it's written, the way that that's structured is, these books are kind of showing, hey, after Moses died, Joshua did this. And now after the death of Joshua, these things are happening. But it equates Moses and Joshua as being, I don't want to say equal leaders, because there was nobody ever equivalent to Moses according to the Torah. But, you know, that he's in the line of Moses. So it kind of establishes that on sort of a subliminal level. But the question of, do they take it or do they not take it? Okay, and what I do with everything I've just read in Joshua when I get to the book of Judges is a real question. Okay, it's sort of a contradiction. Yes, sir?
In the NIV, the first Judges 1:1 ends a little bit differently. It says, who of us is to go up first to fight? I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead. I'm looking at verse 2.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll do it anyway.
Okay, go ahead.
The Lord said, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hand. So when I read that, Joshua says, the land that I am giving to them, and here it says, the land that I have given. I said, hey, it's already done.
Okay, yeah, so this is one of those fun things in Hebrew that it's really hard to explain in English. Hebrew has no past tense, no future tense, no present tense. Okay, instantly Greek's the same way. It has, in one sense, it has completed action, ongoing action. Okay? And so what you have here is what comes across as being past tense in English is really a statement that God is saying to the Israelites, to Judah, is the fact that they are going to be delivered into your hand is a completed action because I've already ensured it will happen. Does that make sense? It comes across as if it was done in the past, the way it reads in English, but the way that sort of a phrase works when they're saying who will go up first or who should go up first, and Yahweh's response saying Judah goes up first because the fate of what's happening I've already decided. Does that make sense?
But it still raises that question: why do they feel like they still got to conquer it? They should have. It's already been given.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because in the book of Joshua we've got a whole chapter of them settling and conquering and doing all these things, and now in the book of Judges at the beginning, it's like, well, who goes up? Right? Joshua's already dead, right? So it's really hard to reconcile those sort of two accounts. Okay? Let's look at some things. So first of all, it's identical, as I said, to Joshua 1. There are some interesting stylistic parallels in this chapter to Numbers 21, which is kind of a travel log that says they went here and they battled these people and they beat them. They went here and they battled these people and they beat them. We get the story of Numbers 21 of, it's one of my favorites, the bronze serpent. Okay? What in the world is going on with a bronze serpent? Okay, we don't have time to talk about that now. But anyway, there are parallels between how that passage is structured and how we see the beginning of Judges chapter 1. Another interesting question is, where do we end? Where do we think this section ends? Does it end with the end of chapter 1, which means it's just a whole summary of battles and failures? Okay? Or does it end in Judges chapter 2, which we'll look at in a minute, that talks about sort of a commentary of the failure of a generation to know who Yahweh was and to follow his commands. Okay? And it can interpret how we break this and how we read it based on where you put the break. And the fact of the matter is that scholars don't agree on where there's a break. Okay? It's a matter of great debate. But this also raises the question of, and we'll look at more of this as we go in today, some people read Judges as being pro-Judah, pro-Southern Kingdom, and anti-Northern tribes. In this first chapter, the only group that has any success in driving out the Canaanites is Judah. Everybody else fails. So, is this a pro-Judah text that's explaining why Judah succeeds and Judah is a good, the southern kingdom is good, and the northern kingdom ultimately will fail? Is it setting that up? There's a lot of people that think that, but it's also a lot of people that disagree. So, anyway, I just set that up to some things we think about as we go through this. So there's some other interesting curiosities and contradictions that I see in this intro that I think is important for us to figure out what in the world we make of this book in the introduction. And here's the first. So, it says in Judges chapter 1, verses 4 through 7, "Then Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. They came upon Adonai-Bezek at Bezek, and fought against him, and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adonai-Bezek fled, but they pursued him, and caught him, and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Adonai-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table, as I have done. So God has paid me back. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there." A couple things to point out before we talk about the big thing. Canaanites and Perizzites. What's the difference? Anybody know? A parasite as opposed to a parasite. Okay. Okay. So the question is, we really don't know. But what some have speculated is that Canaanites represent city dwellers, people that dwell within walled cities. And Perizzites are the country people that live outside the walled cities, that live in tent dwellings and things like that. And so oftentimes you see them together, Canaanites and Perizzites, not so much that it's not so much that it's an ethnic identification, but it is a social identification. City dwellers and all the people in the surrounding countryside. Okay? So when it says they defeated them all, it kind of means they took everything. Canaanites and Perizzites is code for taking everything. Okay? So my question is, who controls Jerusalem in this passage?
Jebusites.
Where, do you see any Jebusites there?
They're not talking about Jerusalem. Well, I mean, they brought him to Jerusalem and he died there.
They brought him to Jerusalem and he died there. But who's in control of Jerusalem? If you read between the lines, who do you think's in control of Jerusalem in this text?
Sounds like Judah is.
If this is all you had, you'd think Judah's in control of Jerusalem. That's the natural, logical assumption you would make. Ah! Huh! Wasn't even called Jerusalem then. Okay. Instantly that name, just as an aside, that name Adonai-Bezek literally means the Lord of Bezek. So it's basically the guy running Bezek is the guy that gets, that's it's probably not his name, it's just the way they talk about him. Okay? Well, let's look at the very next verse. Then the people of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They put it to the sword and set the city on fire. Wait a minute. Didn't they just take this leader to Jerusalem in the passage before? But now they're saying they fought against Jerusalem and took it. Now, maybe they handed the guy over to the local people that were in charge of Jerusalem. Okay, maybe. And then later, Judah came in and took it. It's possible. Reasonable explanation. But now let's look a little bit further in the chapter. But the Benjaminites did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. So the Jebusites have lived in Jerusalem among the Benjaminites to this day. Who controls Jerusalem?
A joint control.
Is it joint?
Well,
Folks, I'll be honest, it takes a lot of mental gymnastics for me to not think that these passages can be reconciled. To think that these passages can be reconciled. It appears to be two separate accounts, two separate traditions of what happened to Jerusalem. Incidentally, what does 1 Samuel say? Actually, let's go a little earlier than that. Judges 19 through 21, if anyone remembers that story, which we'll look at towards the end of our study. Levite and the concubine. What city does the concubine servant say they should go to? Does anyone remember? Jabus, the city of Jerusalem. And the Levite says, no, we're not going there. That's a foreigner city. We're going to go on to an Israelite city, and they go to Gibeah. And then in 1 Samuel, David decides to make a capital, and he picks Jerusalem. And who's living there at the time? It's Jebusites, because the Benjaminites couldn't take it. And it's David that takes Jerusalem. So the fate of Jerusalem, as we see described here, it seems like it gets different. It has a different fate. Different traditions about who took it and when. And it's really hard to reconcile. It's really hard.
but they were told in a lot, in a lot of cases by God to destroy everything. And they didn't. They were married. They kept spoils that should have been devoted to God and all that kind of thing. And so because they didn't do it, they probably had muddy waters anyway about ancestry and
Yeah, so there's some of that. And we're going to talk about, as we'll get through, Judges give some explanations of why things happen, okay? But anyway, I point this out to say, this intro is kind of muddied in terms of what was the state of Jerusalem, okay? And it's kind of a mess trying to figure out what is what. Another one is, we've looked partly at this. This is the conquest and Joshua's death. This is what happens at the end of Joshua. Joshua gives a big speech, much like Moses gives in Deuteronomy, at the end of Deuteronomy. And he says, then I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived on the other side of the Jordan. They fought with you, and I handed them over to you, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then King Balak, son of Zippor, of Moab, set out to fight against Israel. He sent and invited Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I would not listen to Balaam. Therefore he blessed you, so I rescued you out of his hand. When you went up over the Jordan and came to Jericho, the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites and the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And I handed them over to you. I sent the hornet, which we don't know what that means, ahead of you, which I drove out before you. The two kings of the Amorites, it was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and towns that you had not built. And you live in them, you eat the fruit of the vineyards and the olive yards that you did not plant. This is Joshua summarizing everything he's done for Israel. Seems like he conquered a whole lot. Well, as we've already seen, Judges 1:1 says, after the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first against the Canaanites to fight against them? Seems like it's a little odd. And then we get this in Judges chapter 2, verses 6 through 10. When Joshua dismissed the people, hold on, I thought Joshua was dead. The Israelites all went to their own inheritances to take possession of the land. The people worshiped the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. So they buried him in the bounds, the inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Moreover, that whole generation was gathered to their ancestors, and another generation grew up after them who did not know the Lord or the work he had done for Israel. Is there a contradiction? Joshua dies twice in the first 2 chapters of Judges.
It's like you're watching a show that keeps on going back.
Yeah, it's like a flashback, right? Okay, and that's maybe one way to look at it, is a flashback, okay? But it brings up some new data here that we don't have in the other one, and that is that, okay, everybody that Joshua led followed Yahweh, and then there came this other generation after them that didn't know about it. And that's where the problems start. That's a little different than some of the questions around, you didn't take the land, you let them live. Right? Here it's, well, they didn't know Yahweh. It's a challenge. Okay? And so I'm going to save this for next time so we have time to deal with it. What I think is really interesting in this chapter, and we'll look next week at this, is there are some geographic details that it gives us in this chapter about land they take and land they don't take. And the things that they don't take are really, really important. And the names that we often just skip over because it's some weird foreign name have real significance. And what they set up is what's going to happen in the rest of the book. Okay? So what I'd encourage you to do is read Judges chapter 1 again. And also you might want to read the first judge, Ehud. And we'll talk a little bit about him too. But there's just so much here that we don't have enough time to go into it today. We'll save it for next time. But ask yourself, take note of when you see the name of a place, maybe write it down. And if you want, if you've got a map or something available, look at where that place is. And then maybe think, what is the significance that they did not take that place? And we'll dive into some geography and talk about what it is that results from what they don't take. And it's really, really important.
I have a
Yes,
question.
sir.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Are the tribes of Israel united at this time, or are they divided at this time?
Oh, that's an excellent, excellent question.
Because what I'm hearing, to me, makes it seem like you have different perspectives within the tribes of Israel, and they were vying for political power and influence. And so one version is, look at us, we did this thing, and the other version is another tribe, oh, they didn't do it, we did it. Or they did it wrong and we did it right because they were trying to.
Yeah.
I'm asking, I don't know.
So that's a very good question. And so, when you look at, from the Exodus through Deuteronomy and even into Joshua, they are united, right? The children of Israel, okay? And you see that phrase used in the book of Judges, but what you begin to also see is Judah asks Simeon, hey, you come up with us, and we'll help you get your land too. Well, why is that? Because the allotment of Simeon is right smack dab in the middle of Judah. Okay? Or, you see the various tribes trying to take their land. It's not in the book of Judges, it seems like everybody's trying to take their own land and settle it, as opposed to sort of a unified army going through and taking everything. Now you read the book of Joshua, and it seems to talk about more of a unified front, except for the fact that some of the Reubenites say, hey, our possession's over here. How about we just settle here? And Joshua, I think it's in Judges, he said to them, or I think it's in Joshua he says this, or maybe in one of the earlier books, fine, you all can camp here, but you got to send some folks over to help us take the rest of it, right? So just because you're in your land doesn't mean you can't help everybody else. But the book of Judges seems to be very much each tribe for themselves in the way it describes it.
My question kind of relates to that. When I first read this, it seems to suggest that the Israelites asked the Lord who is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites, right?
Yep.
And he says, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands.
Yep.
Did he intend that only Judah would take the land? And by going to the Simeonites, they right off the bat, they were disobedient to God's instructions.
Okay. Yeah. So I have heard that argument. And this is one of those places where, as I said, we have different voices in the text. Okay. And the voice in the text in Judges chapter 1 seems to be the sort of humanist voice that just presents the facts. Okay. It's not like there's nothing in the text that says Judah sinned by asking Simeon to help them. Okay? It seems more like, hey, these two tribes are going to cooperate to take a land because there's a shared interest in... If Judah takes their land, Simeon's is right smack in the middle, and it's just a natural fit. But I have heard some people question whether or not did Judah sin, did they go against God's will by asking Simeon to go along? Is that a demonstration of a lack of faith? Certainly it can be read that way. I'm not sure that's how I read it personally. I kind of look at it more as a statement of fact. This is what they did. And it shows sort of intertribal cooperation on a small scale within the context of everybody kind of getting their own land for themselves, if that makes sense. And as I said last week, the book of Judges very much reflects a tribal social environment, not a unified kingdom. Okay? It's tribal chieftains. Yes, ma'am.
I think whenever Joshua, we love to believe that Joshua was going to give them victory. But at the end of Joshua, he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The two verses before that is, will you serve the gods of our forefathers? Will you serve the gods of this land?
Yes.
See where they were, but he said, as for me and my house.
We will serve.
So he identified that they would continue to have problems.
Yeah.
Those two other.
Yes. Very true. Very true. That's right.
I have a real problem with this first book of Judges anyway, from the standpoint of it goes into the idea of war, and it says, in Judges, it's talking about Judah and Simeon as if they're not the tribe, but the actual person.
Oh, okay.
I will
That's
ask my brother and everything, and then right before that, of course, it says, and all the elders that came. Obviously, it wasn't Simeon and Judah talking. This is very common in Hebrew. It's a way of saying, it's a collective noun. It says Judah, talking about it in the singular, Right.
for the whole people. and his brother, which could easily, the word brother could also mean kin. My close relative, my kin, is going to help me too. Again,
They're all kin.
tribal tribal focus.
And the fact that there's no major prophet during this period of time, so the recounting of what's going on, while you've got a generation of people that aren't serving God and that's coming in, just getting accounts of this, I see why there's probably a collection of multiple writings and multiple accounts during this whole period of time.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
What I find, and I'll give you my personal opinion, I think we have different traditions reflected here in the text. And the beauty is that whoever collected it thought it was important to keep all of them. And honestly, so I would say the messiness, and one of my professors who I love dearly and who is a big Judges scholar, disagrees with me on that. I disagree with him on this. I think the messiness is purposeful. Okay? I think it shows you that the conquest was messy. It wasn't a conquest, was it a settlement? It's messy. Okay? And it's messy from the start, and what ends up happening is, as we're going to see next week, it's a setup for problems. Not for some of the reasons we know about, but there's some other underlying factors that exacerbate those problems that we'll look at. Okay? Any other questions?
I think it's interesting that within one generation, they are with God, and now they're without God.
Yes. And I think that's a real big lesson for today. It doesn't take,
It's one generation.
it barely takes a generation. You're lucky. And actually, that's a very good point. We're going to see this throughout the Judges. Because one thing we'll look at is pay careful attention to the numbers. How long did the land have tranquility after a judge delivers them? The numbers will say a lot. And the generation is a big factor.
Generations for that one were like 40 years.
40. 40 is the number of a generation. So when you see a number that's not 40 or not a multiple of 40, it's a big symbolic warning sign. Something's gone wrong. Something's getting worse. And we'll see that in these stories. All right. Anything else? Thank you all very much. Next week we will finish this up and jump into the first judge, Ehud.